Hi there and welcome to this Antioch Worship Leaders Training video. This is the fourth video in our mini-series on when you're actually leading. We've already looked at gathering people in, leading the room, reading the room, and this time we're looking at sending people out. We've spoken before about how sung worship doesn't exist on its own. It's part of a whole service of worship, and it's really beautiful when God brings together different parts of that service into a unified storyline that speaks to his people. Sometimes that happens as the Spirit works through our communication and our planning, and sometimes it happens without deliberate planning in advance. But you can become more aware of it when you're leading worship by asking 3 questions. What's just happened? What's happening now? And what's happening next? These 3 questions develop our awareness of sung worship as part of a whole service and help us to lead by linking different parts together. That first question, what's just happened, is most important when you're gathering people into worship. The second question, what's happening now, is something we looked at in the video on reading the room, being attentive to the work of the Spirit in the moment and then responding. This time we're coming to the end of our time of sung worship and asking what's happening next. Now, there are usually 2 situations when you ask that question at the end of a time of sung worship, either in the middle of a service or at the end of a service. In the middle of a service in an Antioch church, you're probably looking ahead to a sermon or some kind of teaching from the Bible. So to lead through that transition, you might want to pray at the end of the last song of your set, thanking God for his presence, welcoming his Spirit to teach and form his people through his written word. Then you can invite people to sit down and welcome up whoever is going to lead the next part of the service. Again, that invitation to a physical posture change signals a new moment in our gathering together, and that prayer helps with a change in mind and heart posture through that transition too. Now let's think about the end of the service. What's happening next might seem like a strange question to ask here. It's the end of the service, so nothing's happening next, right? Well, no. Sung worship doesn't exist on its own. It's part of a whole service of worship. And in a similar way, a service of worship doesn't exist on its own. It's part of a whole life of worship. So, what's happening next is exactly the right question to ask. The end of a service is a great opportunity to look ahead to the coming week and make some kind of connection between the gathered church and the scattered church. This moment of gathered worship together and our whole lives of worship elsewhere. Now, it might be that another service leader does this and concludes the worship service, and that's fine. But if it's you, then take the opportunity to draw the threads of the service together and then guide people's attention outward again. You can do this in a few ways. One way is through a closing prayer, perhaps thanking God for something that has come up in the teaching or the prayers and connecting that to life outside the gathered church. For example, if you've been learning about Jesus' mercy and forgiveness, you could pray something like, Father, thank you for the mercy that you show us through Jesus. Thank you for forgiving us and welcoming us into your family. As we go from here into the week ahead, please fill us with your Spirit and help us to extend your grace to whoever we're with in whatever we do. You could also do this with your choice of closing song. Could you choose a song that encourages people to look outward into the next week or start praying into the situations they'll be in? And you can do this with a more specific invitation too. I've often paused in the middle of a final song, perhaps kept playing, but then invited the congregation to sing a verse or a chorus again, but with their workplace or school or street or family in mind, turning that song into a prayer. The point here is the same one that we spoke about in our first video. What is worship? Worship is a whole life response to God's mercy, and gathered worship in church helps to train God's people to worship God in the whole of life. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father sent me, so I am sending you." And as worship leaders, we have the honour of reminding God's people about how Jesus sends all of us out into the world in the power of his Spirit to live and work to his praise and glory. So to sum up, sung worship is part of a whole service. 3 questions to ask. What's just happened? What's happening now? What's happening next? In the middle of a service, you could end the worship set in a way that prepares people for what's next, often learning from the Bible. At the end of a service, if it's you closing the service, draw the threads together and guide people's attention outward again towards worship in the whole of life. So that's the end of our series on when you're actually leading. Next time, we're going to look across different parts of the worship leading process with the theme of being led by the Spirit in all of it. So see you then.